quarantined.
Like, and I always wanted to know, like, I know that we grow up differently, but like, what are the differences that you notice talking to Black kids about masculinity and then talking to white kids about masculinity?
Wow, it's
Black
a good
and brown
question.
kids and then white kids.
There's a very different construct of masculinities for Black and brown kids as opposed to the one that exists for white kids. The one that exists for white kids is the culturally dominant form of masculinity, right? So in the UK, there are ideas of, if you ask, or when I was growing up anyway, if you ask the kid who their hero is, likelihood is they might say David Beckham. If you ask a Black kid who their hero is, they might say David Beckham, but that is not somebody that they relate. That's not somebody that they see themselves in, right? So I think there are, on a representation level, which I think is the level that we always talk about, there's a massive difference already. But then I think culturally, there are loads of norms that are existing within those communities that the predominantly white groups of people doing the work are not aware of. So if let's say we're trying to dismantle masculinity for kids, and we're talking about chatting to women, we're talking about catcalling in the street, right? So I might be talking about how you, and it's all very conversation based. So I'm looking deep in the recesses of my mind to pick a conversation out. But I might be talking about how you chat to a woman when you're walking down the road. If you see a woman at the bus stop, and I think there's a difference in the way that white men would maybe do that in terms of it being something that is very often linked to power in a very different way to the way that power functions for a Black man. So I think there's a fear element there for Black men in terms of talking to white women.
Yes.
There's a fetishization element there for white men when talking to Black women. When Black men talk to Black women, there's a very different dynamic to when white men talk to white women. And I think if you're really going to deconstruct an issue for a person, which we have to do, right? We have to deconstruct it. The things that somebody's carrying into that conversation are very different depending on their culture. So for brown kids, there are very different constructs of masculinity that exist within their households to the ones that exist within culture. So there might be very different things, different roles that men and women play in the house to the ones that they play in the streets or to the ones that they play in schools. There are massive differences between the ways that Black kids will address their parents to the ways that white kids will address their parents, or the ways that Black parents will address their kids to the ways that white parents will address their kids. So when you're talking about violence, physical violence, male on male violence, violence against women and girls, whatever the type of violence might be, we have to understand that coming into that conversation, people have very different constructs and ways of understanding violence. And it's also not even just a Black and brown and white issue. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's also a class issue because there are massive differences in the ways that violence manifests depending on your education. So manipulation and physical violence might look very different in a poor working class family from East London to how it will look for an upper middle class family in Oxford. One of those families is going to get caught by social services, the other one is not. Kids in private schools, kids that go to Eton, don't even necessarily see their parents that often, right? So when you're talking about what you learn from your dad about masculinity, those lessons that you're learning and picking up will be drastically different depending on which kids you're talking to. I don't know if that was necessarily a great answer, but I feel like it makes sense in my head in terms of, and I don't know,